Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome back entrepreneur and co-founder of Forthright People, Anne Candido. So welcome, Anne.
Hi, thanks for having me again, Karen. It's great to be back.
Thank you. So, Anne, firstly, I'd like to talk about personal branding and what and how do you believe some of the biggest challenges and pitfalls individuals make when it comes to personal branding? And how does one strike a balance between business and personal? And what are some of the tools and ways you have helped some of your clients, especially during the massive changes we've all been through during this pandemic?
Yeah, sure. I think the place to start is just a recognition of the fact that we are all brands.
Yes.
And we are all selling something, right? And personal, professional, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All of our success is tied to whether or not we can get people to buy what we're selling. And oftentimes when we're not quite achieving that, we tend to start feeling pretty bad about ourselves. And then we start to blame other things like circumstances. Common ones that we get are, my boss hates me, or this is a boys club, or, which actually might all be true, but it actually doesn't change the circumstance, right? I mean,
No.
we're still stuck in this place where we're not being able to compellingly sell what we want people to buy from us, right? And really at that point, we have two choices. You can either crumble under the pressure,
Yes.
which a lot of people do, or you can play the game. And that is when we actually start, getting to our clients and asking them to really start reflecting back on their personal brand to see what's at play here, right? To see if they need to cultivate their personal brand differently in order to achieve better success.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to also understand too that many people are using now personal brand as kind of a buzzword, and they really refer to it esoterically. But April and I, under Forthright People, have put some really good structure behind it based on our 35 plus years of branding and marketing experience.
Yes.
And we define personal brand with three different components. One is your characteristics. These are your features and then your tendencies as a result of those features.
Yes.
Your appearance, which is both your visual and your verbal appearance. And then your behaviors and actions, which is how your characteristics and your appearance can manifest themselves into how you show up. And ultimately, this is what people call your reputation, or what people say good or bad about you behind your back. Yes. And that is really the crux of what a personal brand is. And we actually have a really in-depth podcast episode on our podcast Marketing Sparks that goes into this. It's called What is Personal Branding and Why Do I Need to Work on Mine? So that's a really good way to kind of get yourself introduced to that. We also have worksheets on our website that help you take this into more depth. So that kind of gives you the structure of what we classify as a personal brand and why it's so important. I'm happy to go through an example if you want me to go through an example.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because I think that's the thing is people often talk on the surface and then they don't really know, from an audience perspective, and then they're not really getting the meat and potatoes of what they should be doing.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So let me give an example here, and I'm going to just use a first person because it's easier, but I think anybody who knows me will know that this doesn't apply to me. But anyway, so if I was going to focus on one of the characteristic, I might focus on a characteristic of being shy. This is a common one we get, one that we coach a lot of people on. And if you're shy, then your tendencies as a result of being shy may be to feel really intimidated when you go into a big group setting or a meeting where, especially if there's people you don't know, and you might tend to be quiet in those settings, right? So that's kind of like a tendency as a result of being shy and a context for which that might actually present itself, right?
Yeah.
And then from an appearance standpoint, I kind of mentioned a couple of these, but from a visual standpoint, people who are shy tend to be a little bit more, or want to be a little bit more recessive. So maybe they dress a little bit more neutrally. When they speak, they may have more of a quiet voice, and their voice may not feel as compelling, and definitely not the loudest voice in the room, right? Yeah. And when those do, then they manifest themselves into behaviors and actions. So that when they do get in those rooms, the way that they show up is feeling unconfident, right? Or maybe they choose not to speak at all. So sometimes people are wondering, well, why is this person even in the room if they don't have a point of view? Or it might even be like, hey, we thought this person was the expert and they're not even speaking up, right? So that's kind of how a personal brand kind of manifests itself. And I think it's really important to note that if you're shy, that's not good or bad. I mean, you're just shy. That's who you are. It's how it manifests itself into certain situations that determines about whether or not being shy is working for you or working against you. And that's what we really focus on, because it's only the behaviors and actions and to some level your appearance that can be changed. Your characteristics cannot be changed or who you are.
Yes, absolutely. And also I think it pertains to both introverts and extroverts as well, right? I mean, that also does play a part, I think.
Well, it can, but it's interesting that you say that, because I'm actually an introverted person, but I'm not very shy. So if I get in a room,
that's true.
Yeah. And so if I get in a room and I feel compelled to say something, I will say something. Now, because I'm introverted, it takes a lot of energy out of me to do that. So it takes a lot of energy to be in those rooms. So that's what I have to manage. So that is my tendency as a result of that. But I tend to be a little bit more outspoken in those situations because I'm compelled by other characteristics of integrity, of wanting to show up as an expert. Like those sorts of characteristics are really important for me. So those overpower the fact that I might be an introvert on this side.
Yes. So women in business, there are still many roadblocks that women are faced with and have to fight for, whether it's equal pay, dealing with sexual harassment, positions of leadership, and so many more challenges. So as a branding specialist, do you help your female clients not only to position themselves, but also how to help them with some of the challenges, having gone through so much within your own career? And can you give us any examples?
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have just added a coaching practice to our offerings. It's not even on our website yet, but it is something we've already started doing because we're getting so many female clients and just our female colleagues who are wanting this exact perspective. And where we start from when we're talking to our clients about these types of challenges is in mindset and perspective. And this is so fundamental, because I think it's just really, really interesting just to know that in the US, women have only had the right to vote for 100 years. It seems like totally astronomically, like only 100 years. I mean, that's not really that long ago.
That's so little in the greater scheme of, thousands of years.
I know, and if you think about how long, men have led the country and have been prominent leaders, I mean, only having the right to vote, like that means like some people who are alive, their grandmas and their moms were not even able to vote, which really means that as women in business or women in general, we are still trailblazers. And I think we forget about that sometimes. And we get wrapped up in sometimes the unfairness of it all, like everything is not equal. And that again is ultimately true. But like I said before, you have two choices to make. You either can crumble under the pressure or you decide to take the torch and take your turn. And you decide to be the trailblazer. And now that's not always easy, right? And
because we're doing a lot of these things to help other women coming up, or even young girls coming up, down the line. So it's exactly the same thing. Like people who fought for the right to vote and all of that, did that for all of us. So now it's our turn to try and do the same within what we had challenged ourselves.
You're exactly right. And that's on from two respects. And I think what you said is exactly right on. One is when you are able to put yourself in that mindset, you take your power back. And I think that is so critically important, because when you feel like you have control, then you can be the navigator of your own life. If you feel like you're always at the circumstance of other things that are going on around you, you'll never be able to progress and be able to be that trailblazer that you need to be in order to achieve the success you want in life. Right. And I think that is really important from one point. But I'll use an example from my own personal experience to make a point on what you just said, because I think that's super important too. But you asked for examples. When I was getting ready to be promoted, I had checked the boxes on every single exceeded expectations box I could on the work that I was developing. And my boss, who happened to be a female, told me that her one boss above me, so my two bosses above me, said she's not willing to sign off on your promotion because she doesn't think you're a happy person. And I'm like, a happy person? What does that have to do with anything associated with what I am doing? And from a performance standpoint, she's like, well, she doesn't think you smile a lot. And I was like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me right now? I'm sitting here thinking like no other like man would be told that they're not going to get promoted because they don't smile enough. But again, it's like one of those things that's a female oriented kind of characteristic or trait that people expect. And it's absurd for two reasons. One is at that time, if she had known me at all, she would have known I was going through a divorce. She was actually lived out of the country, so she'd only come in every couple of months. And the one time she did come in and made the snap decision, it was at a very early meeting where I was going through a very tense time with my divorce. So if she had known anything about me, she would have known that the circumstance was what it was. And that might have been some indication or clue as to why I wasn't exactly happy that meeting.
Yes.
But it's also absurd because it's a female telling the other female this. So I think, one thing women get stuck into, I think, is the zero-sum female game where they like only a certain amount of females are allowed at the top, which is exactly the opposite of what we should be perpetuating.
100%. This is exactly what I experienced on a LinkedIn thing where I was trying to uplift this woman for the podcast. And then she was like, she just said, well, take me off your list. And initially she was like, send me the info. She was all nice. And then the next minute defensive and disconnecting on LinkedIn. I'm like, well, what on earth did I do? We're here to support each other. So it again goes back to the whole proprietorial thing, which I've never really understood. And if women want to support women, then we need to be doing that and not be proprietorial.
Agreed. And because trailblazing by nature means you're breaking down the barriers and making the path easier for people to follow you. If you're going to make it just as hard for everybody else as it was for you, that is not trailblazing. And that's what we have to recognize as a group of females, that if you're going to indeed trailblaze, you need to lift everybody up. And that's the only way of being able to do it. Now, that all being said, what I was talking about crumbling or playing the game, I decided to play the game. So what did I do? I could have said, hey, that's unfair. I'm not going to do that. I played the game instead. So I became her best friend. When she came to the States, I was the person who took her to all her meetings. I took her to the agency meetings. I was the one who facilitated all of her engagement there. I smiled. I was happy. And within 3 months, I was promoted. All right. So people could say, hey, you sold out. I'm like, sure, you can call me a sellout if you want.
I think you just turned the situation to your advantage, frankly. That's how I see it. Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to look at your personal brand and to say, hey, okay, I could have decided, hey, there's something wrong with me. No, it was just the fact that sometimes my emotions really show through. I'm a very transparent person. That is a core characteristic.
Yeah, you and me both.
Right. But in that situation, it didn't work for me. Right. So what I had to do was kind of decide, okay, that transparency in that situation, I should have played it a little bit cooler. I could have prepared myself a little bit better for that meeting and been in a better, situation and prepared myself emotionally for that. Yes. I did not do that. Right. So I took responsibility for that. I noticed that my transparency did not, come across well, that was not moving me towards my goals. And I had to change that. And that is all about your personal brand, why cultivating your personal brand is so important.
Absolutely. So do you believe that in 2021 that there is a shift for women? And why do you believe this narrative of men versus women still plays out? And how do you believe on a macro and micro scale this can be changed? And what are the actionable steps that need to be taken to change this narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were definitely talking about that in the last question.
Yeah.
But let me take it to
that was kind of like points. More women versus women, but I think this is like, we need to work with men. It's obviously imperative to us, but there still is this disconnect. There's still a lot of challenges. So I'm just interested on your perspective, what are the actionable steps that we can take to change this narrative?
Yeah. And the good thing is I do think it's changing. I see it around me every day. So I think that's good. But to answer your question directly, I think the number one thing that needs to happen is for both men and women alike to recognize that there are inherent biases in the systems and just acknowledge those. For example, we talked about the zero-sum female game. That is a very real thing. There also is other female-oriented biases, I think, and these are not right or wrong. They just are there. So, for example, there is a impact to legacy as a result of women changing their names. I saw it happen to myself. I've seen it happen to executive female leaders, where when you change your name, all of a sudden nobody can remember what you did before that. And that's just because people change and the environment changes. It just is what it is, right? So going back to your last question, we talked to a lot of our female leaders who had these kinds of aspirations about whether or not they should change their name or not, right? Men don't change their name. They never lose their legacy in that way, right? There's also, I call the female birthing factor, which is until something dramatically changes, females are the only ones who can give birth to kids. And I love the fact that men are now rising to the occasion more and more. Now we have paternity leaves and they're taking a much more active role in kids' lives. And you don't have as much of a dynamic of the male and female roles. That is beautiful, but there's still the fact that women have to grow the babies. They have to deliver the babies. They need to recover from having the babies. They need to, a lot of them choose to breastfeed. I mean, that's as much as a 2-year process, right?
Yeah.
And when you hear a lot of like females and males talking about it, you can hear the dilemma, because men, when they still talk about their history and what they've accomplished, they don't actually mention their kids and their families a lot, but you'll always hear a woman say, and so doing all this, I had my first child. And so doing this, I had my second child. It's always going to be constantly something that is within their lives.
Family.
Right. And that's going to be a responsibility for them, regardless of the role the male is playing. And so I think those sorts of things are really real things. And I know that a lot of companies are becoming a whole lot more progressive. And on a macro side, when you ask the macro side, I think that is what's going to actually fuel the change. Now, there are inherent system flaws, but those are things that take a lot of work to change. and it's a lot to ask somebody to take on. But these micro things of being able to say, hey, I take responsibility for the fact that maybe I have some personal biases associated with some of these things that are going on. Like, a women coming back from maternity leave and then all of a sudden being expected to be like they've never been gone, for example, or did they lose something, or maybe they shouldn't have the same level of notches on their belt, if you will, from a success or career progression standpoint, because they were gone for 6 months to a year. I mean, those are the types of things that, the systems need to take care of, but each individual needs to acknowledge, hey, are these coming into play? Am I judging this person based on these things that, are female relevant, that they are 100% responsible for?
Yeah, absolutely. So gone are the days of brand marketing and manipulating the consumer. So do you believe individuals do this to a certain degree, or how do you help your clients to not only build an authentic brand, but also to help them stand out in an oversaturated and really noisy social media space? And what is it that you do differently, and how has this helped your clients? And do you have any examples you could give us?
Yeah, sure. The place to start here is really to be very clear about what a brand is. And I talk about this a lot, in that a brand must answer 3 fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I different? And why do you want me? And yeah, right. And you're absolutely right, Karen. In an attempt to answer these questions, a lot of brands will go off the rails a bit, and it leads them into a place of inauthenticity, which can feel a lot like manipulation. And when brands go there, or when businesses try to go there in an effort to develop their brand, that is like death now, for sure, is like death now. And what we do in order to help our clients really answer these questions in a truly authentic way is define what their emotional impact is going to be on the people's lives that they plan to serve. And this is all about answering the question, what do you sell? And it seems like a very fundamental, but like very simple question. Well, I know what I sell. I sell shoes. I sell food at a restaurant. I sell, clothing. I sell cars, whatever. But really, those are just things or services that you put a price tag on what people are really buying, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about personal brand before too, is the emotional impact you're having on their lives. All right. This doesn't mean it doesn't have to be altruistic or philanthropic, which is where a lot of brands and businesses are going. And that's okay if it works authentically for you. But what you're selling needs to go beyond the basic function of what your product does or your service does. This is why people want you. This is what's going to make that, like I call it, the brand love connection between you and your consumer that belongs to just you, that builds authenticity for your brand and makes you a essential part of their lives. So yes, for example, I'll give a broad example because I think it's easier for people to kind of like wrap their minds around. So I worked at P&G and I worked on our Tide fabric care business, but specifically Tide for about a decade. And we talked a lot about our performance benefits a ton in a lot of our advertising and our marketing. We talked about we get out 100 stains. We talked about get out this stain, that stain. But if you actually talk to our consumers wouldn't tell you, yeah, I love Tide because they got out 100 stains. They would say, I love Tide because it got the stain out of my sweater that I absolutely love. It got my kids' uniforms clean. So when they went to go play, they weren't the kid that was there with stains all over the uniforms. I didn't have to keep on replacing their uniforms, and they could just play and they could play freely and they could just go for it. That's why this brand like Tide, it's a laundry detergent. It's been around for 75 years and is over $1 billion brand. It's not just because it's a really good product. And I think this applies to any business, small to large. This is not just a big brand thing, which is what a lot of people think. This is from a small to a large business, no matter where you are in business, no matter how much money you make, no matter how long you've been around. It's all about cultivating that emotional connection that allows your personal brand and your service to connect with a consumer in an authentic way that you can own. This is what builds that tangible value. That's what allows you to command higher prices. It allows you to scale more quickly. It helps getting more people into your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same as Virgin Atlantic. Like the approach as well is it's more about the experience than just selling or just being a seat, a person or another person on the flight. So yeah, it's
exactly right.
Yeah.
And Sir Richard Branson did an amazing job with that, because he knew, and if you listen to any of his interviews, he'll tell you he knew it was a commodity play, right? It's a price play. And if he doesn't want to get into that price play, and if he wants to give consumers a specific reason to choose him, he had to create an experience that was above and beyond what other airlines were offering. And of course, the man is over the top on everything. So you can always expect it over a top. He's a perfect example of somebody who has translated their personal brand into their business, and it's done so just brilliantly. Yeah. So that's definitely a really good nod to any entrepreneur out there who is wondering what those kinds of links look like.
Yes, absolutely. So would you say it is possible to monetize off personal brands, or do you believe that this is more of a space to open the door to engage for further business? And what do you believe is more effective?
Yeah, people monetize off their personal brand all the time, both as a profession and out of necessity. So I'll give some examples on both sides. So I almost actually just alluded to that with Sir Richard Branson, that if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're just starting out, you are the brand for a very long time. You are the one that the investors are buying. You are the ones that's going to get the first customers in. You are the one who's presenting the compelling reason why retailers should bring you into their stores. So you better make sure and be very intentional what parts of your personal brand are going to be reflected in your business, because that ultimately is going to be what compels people to initially engage in your offering, whatever, if it's a product or a service. Yeah. And that's very similar if you're a freelancer. So if you're a freelancer, yes, people are going to buy your work, but they're also going to buy the person behind the work, right? So you could do very good quality work, and that's always imperative, but almost as important is how you get the work done, right? It's like, are you, do you take feedback well? Are you able to facilitate that and do quick changes and quick iterations? Are you communicative? Can people get a hold of you? Like, these are all elements of doing work with people that are as important as actually doing the work itself. But as you mentioned before too, like, athletes and talent and, influencers, they make a business out of their personal brand. But it's not just about what your talent is. Like, for example, we hired Rob Gronkowski, who was an NFL football player, to be a Tide ambassador. Yeah, we hired him because, he's a talented football player and he has a really strong following that we can leverage. So he is popular in that way. But he also had a point of view and a way of being in his character that is defined by his personal brand that we wanted to associate with our Tide brand, right? And if we didn't have that, he would just be a mouthpiece for the brand. And that doesn't work,
and there wouldn't be any connection. There wouldn't be any connection. Yeah.
Right. So you can't tell that authentic story. And then it just falls flat. So a lot of people will spend a lot of money in doing that. But even if they get some blip from it, it's very, very fleeting. So what I tell all of these athletes and entertainers and anybody who's wanting to be an endorser of products is that your talent's going to get your foot in the door, but your personal brand is what's going to get actually the sales, what's going to get people to actually want to pay you to be part of their brand. And there has to be some sort of connection there, either from a point of view, from a passion point, a mission. There has to be some link that makes it relevant.
Yeah, exactly. So this pandemic has certainly amplified and highlighted many aspects of life for people and in business, which has created huge challenges, but has also opened up the space for new opportunities. So what would you say has changed the most, and have these changes helped you to guide your clients due to your own experiences from both a business and personal branding perspective?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the biggest shift that we've seen here in what we call is the democratization of the Zoom box.
Yes.
Which, yeah, right. Everybody now is the same size. And this has really, really thrown a lot of people for a loop, especially if their personal brand was built a lot on appearance. So a lot of our clients who are used to coming in and commanding a room, both by the way that they look and by their presence in general, are finding virtually it's harder for them to have that same authority. On the flip side, though, the people who, like we talked about, being shy, who tend to be a little bit more reserved in these meetings, are finding now more of a voice because everybody is the same size. They don't feel as intimidated anymore. And now that because of Zoom, you have to facilitate the meeting because everybody can't talk over each other like you can in a regular meeting. So there is a little bit more conscientious thought of, okay, who have we not heard from? Who gets to talk? Taking turns to talk, which is helping people feel more comfortable in those kinds of engagements. But it is causing, I would be remiss if I didn't say this too, it is causing a lot of consternation and frustration for leaders specifically. We talk a lot about vigilant leadership. We coach a ton on this. We actually have a podcast episode in this as well, which is the art of leading from afar. And a lot of really successful leaders have embraced this way before the pandemic. But now within the pandemic, this art of leading from afar, just leading from afar in general, has become more of a necessity than actually a choice, right? And it could be really hard for some, especially if your personal brand as a leader is one of being very hands-on or being very engaged. When your folks are virtual, it feels like they're extremely far away, and it's hard to give them the autonomy and the capacity to operate and to feel confident about that. So those are the things that we're seeing the most frequently, and seeing the shifts and how that's impacting team dynamics and the functionality of teams, and something we coach on a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about influence and celebrity branding. I believe that this is something that is not as effective as it used to be, and that going forward, the power of storytelling is more relatable to individuals and has far more gravity and resonance. And the idolization of this fake and synthetic world is going to be done away with. Is it possible, or is it heading in the way due to the fast pace of technology and the shift in the entertainment industry, that COVID has accelerated this? And what are your thoughts and opinions around this? And do you think that this will even the playing field or create more opportunity for those making a significant difference as both entrepreneurs and individuals to change this dynamic going forward? I know that's a lot, but it's just more like, where do you feel it's going to shift to? Because I'm finding more and more people saying they're sick of the whole celebrity thing. Celebrities are sitting in their million or X million dollar homes whining about COVID, but there seems to be, I don't know, there just seems to be a lot of amplification and going like, what are these people actually doing? Because they get paid millions of dollars, but it's like you say, they can either just be a mouthpiece or they can actually have a real resonance with people. So kind of, where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think what's important to acknowledge here is the way to connect with your consumers has not changed, right? It's still the same. And I call these brand love vehicles, is that you have to create the right brand message to deliver with the right storyteller on the right channel at the right time when the consumer is receptive. That has been the art of brand building since the very beginning, right? Now, the environment can change around it, and who you choose to bring into your brand to speak on behalf of your brand as a storyteller, that can change based on the environment. And you need to be very mindful of that, because I think the things that you're saying are very key in choices that people would make with regards to storytellers. So yes. So I think there is an element of that, but I think what's more important here is that you pick the right storytellers for your business and for your brand. So can influencers or can celebrities and talent be the right storytellers? Yeah, they can. I mean, I gave you one example of Rob Gronkowski as an example. I also worked on a program for Downy where we used Rachel Zoe because she, as a fashion expert, could speak very authentically to the use of Downy to the fashionista for the care of their fabrics, right? So, and she loved the product. So that worked really well together. And there's other brands that are perfect examples of this as well. I mean, Nike still relies on celebrity athletes in order to drive their brand. Now they're trying to bring forth like more of the rising stars and more of the everyday athletes to make their brand more human. And I think that's really the key. It's the balance of it all. And we've always talked about influencers being kind of in that triangle, if you will, where at the top you kind of have an influencer that may be top talent that has broad reach and awareness, but can still speak authentically of your brand, to more mid-tier influencers that help you to spread the message, but maybe are probably a little bit more affordable and a little bit more relatable, to the bottom, which is the micro influencers, which you probably tend to have the most of because they're the most affordable, and it allows you to cultivate your message in the most prescriptive way with them. They're a lot more flexible in that. And you build like pyramid of influence that allows your brand to show up in different verticals and allows you to kind of come through the noise. But like you said, and like I said before, if you're just going to buy talent just to hawk your product and be a mouthpiece, that has like less than a 1% chance of working, but you're going to spend a ton of money trying to make it work.
Yes, exactly. So that leads me to the last two questions. What would you say is the most exciting and innovative part of building a personal and business brand with your clients, but also some of the biggest key factors to building both that you want people to know? And then what are the top 3 tips that you would give to anyone looking to build a personal brand?
All right. Yeah, these are good. Okay, so I'll start with your first one first, because the power of personal brand is life changing, and it can be business changing. And I don't say that lightly. I've seen people overcome roadblocks that have been plaguing them for years and progress as a result of intentionally cultivating their personal brand. I gave one example of that in my own personal experience, but there is a gazillion other examples that we've seen of people who've been able to embrace that and being able then to overcome and then persevere and thrive. I've seen people grow stronger in their conviction and their confidence and their adaptability because they now have a much clearer understanding of who they are, and then they have the right mindset in order to engage life and business. We talked a lot about that for females. It's very much the case for vigilant leadership as well. I've seen life-changing relief as people realize their failures are not character flaws, I think that is like one of the most fundamental things to believe. Like I said, characteristics are not good or bad. They who are who you are. It's how they manifest themselves that determines whether or not they're working for you or against you in certain situations. So to have something, not go well, and you be able to say, okay, well, that's just somehow, something didn't work quite right in my behavior and action. I can dial that differently versus like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I'm never going to overcome it. This is something that's going to plague me for the rest of my life. There's so much freedom associated in that. I can't even begin to tell you. And then I've really seen people unite their businesses and the people that work for them, because people are taking more responsibility for themselves. And then they're able to flex and adapt and create highly functional teams as a result of being able to really understand who they are and how they're contributing and how that's impacting the full dynamic of the team. So those are what I'm seeing, people who cultivate their personal brand, as well as think about how their personal brand reflects on their business. Those are the strides I'm seeing, and it's really quite amazing.
Oh, that is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for coming today and for joining. Again, it was really impactful and insightful, and hopefully our audience will take away a lot of really golden key nuggets from this, because, like you said, it's very strategic the way you have to, build your personal and your business brand. So thank you so much for giving so much knowledge and insight.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And if anybody needs help in cultivating their personal brand, please reach out to us at forthright-people.com and listen to our podcast, Marketing Smarts. We have episodes that pretty much cover everything that I've talked about today in one form or another.
Amazing. So are you on social media as well, just so that if people do want to connect, they can also connect that way?
Yes, absolutely. So you can catch me on LinkedIn. So just look for Anne Candido on LinkedIn, and you could catch Forthright People on Instagram. So follow us on Instagram too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you back again to touch on other and exciting projects and new strategies.
I'd love it. Anytime, Karen.
Thank you.